Hey guys, it's Dawn, and today I am back with another watercolor video. This one features our Merry Little Christmas stamp set, and we'll be creating these watercolored ornaments. Now there's a bunch of different ways that you could do this, but I posted this picture on Instagram, and you guys really wanted to know how I did it, so I'm going to show you how to recreate this today. We'll start by taking a look at some of the supplies that I've used. Distress ink and black soot. I'm going to use this to stamp out my ornaments. And then for the watercolor choices, we're going to be using alizarin crimson for the red stripes, and this is by Grumbacher. To tone down that red and create our shadows, I'm going to be using some sap green, and this is also by Grumbacher. We're going to be using quinacridone gold. This is my favorite yellow of all the yellows in watercolor. And then to tone that down for the shadows, we'll be using violet, and this is by Reeves. And then, of course, Payne's Gray. I almost always use Payne's Gray in all of my paintings. I'm using 140-pound Strathmore watercolor paper, and the brushes that I'm using are number 8 round. This is by Grumbacher as well, and a number 0 round. This one has a nice fine tip, so it's great for adding that detail that we're going to need to get in there with the stripes and the top of the ornament. I'm also going to maybe use a number 4 round. If you have one on hand, it's a pretty popular size. You could get away with that one. And alternately, you could use a number 8 flat brush to do your stripes. And I will show you ways to create the stripes using both of those. To add the background, we're going to be using some Tim Holtz distress markers in weathered wood. This is my favorite for adding the background to my watercolor pieces. I'm going to start by stamping out my ornaments. I'm using that black soot for this, but I'm stamping it off 3 or 4 times on scratch paper before I stamp my final impression. This is going to keep it nice and light since I'm going for a photorealistic painting. I don't want that outline to be really harsh. Now for the one that's going to be behind this one, I'm going to line it up, take away any excess ink because it's supposed to be behind it, and then I'm going to stamp it down. Now you'll notice that some of it is overlapping the front ornament. That's fine. Once I'm done doing my painting, you will never see that. My first step is to create that 3-dimensional shape by laying down my base shadows. And to do that, I'm going to start by wetting the entire bulb area of this ornament with clean, clear water. Now mine is tinted just a little bit. My water was a little bit dirty, but that works out well because you can see exactly where I'm wetting the paper. But you will want to start with clean, clear water. Once the bulb is wet, give it a couple seconds to kind of soak in. You don't want it to be dripping wet, but you don't want it to be dry. You still want it to be damp. I'm going to pick up some of that Payne's Gray, and you can see here that I'm using just the tiniest amount of pigment and a lot more water because I want this to be very light. I can add more color later to intensify if I need to. I'm going to start by running my brush along the right and left side of this ornament. This is where the shadows would be the most intense. Since the paper is wet, the pigment is going to continue to move towards the water. Wherever that paper is wet, the pigment is going to continue to spread, and it's going to gradually fade into the white. Let that first bulb dry, and now you can start on your second ornament. Mine is still wet, but I'm going to be careful not to touch it. If you do touch the wet area, they will run together. So it's important. Let that first bulb dry, and then completely wet the bulb of your second ornament. And then just repeat the same thing that you did on your first bulb with this one. Add the shadows to the right and the left side. Remember, these are just your base shadows, so it doesn't have to be perfect at this point. I'll let this layer dry, and then I'll come in and add a second layer of shadow. I'll be using the same concentration of Payne's Gray. Now, doubling up those 2 layers is automatically going to make this more intense. Watercolors are transparent, so even though they're the same concentration, it's going to appear darker. So I'm going to lay in where the shadows are going to be darker. You'll notice right there where the 2 ornaments meet, I've cast a shadow on that back ornament, and then I'm adding a deeper shadow to the right side of this front one. You'll notice that I'm not going all the way to the very edge of the ornament. The same on the left side. I'm leaving a highlight on the left and the right side, and that's because this is a round object. The light would be coming from behind as well as in front, and it's going to create a brighter edge on both sides. This is going to help make it look even more photorealistic. Again, when we're done with this layer, we'll stop and let it dry. I'll be using the number 0 round brush to add the stripes to these ornaments. I've shown you a couple of videos where we just let the water carry the pigment and do all of the work. Here we're going to maintain control over this pigment. This brush is going to help us do that. It's such a small brush and it has such short bristles that it doesn't hold a lot of water. So it allows us to almost draw these stripes on rather than paint them on. You could certainly use a bigger brush and allow the water to carry the pigment like I've shown you before. I'll show you that a little bit later, but for this one, I really wanted to maintain all of the control over this. You can see here, I'm just hand drawing these in, just kind of winging it. If you're more comfortable, you could sketch with a pencil lightly, or if you have a red watercolor pencil, you could use that to sketch your lines and then fill it in. I've laid some pigment on each side and now I'm using water to kind of join those two. This is going to give me a concentrated color on each side and blend it to a natural highlight right there where we've already established our highlight where we laid our base shadow. You'll continue to do the same thing for all of your stripes going down the ornament. Sketching out your basic area, adding pigment to the left and right side, and then using water to join those two areas. Anywhere you need to add more pigment, just add it to either side, and then let the water carry them together. If you get too much color and you lose your highlight, you can use a paper towel to remove some. Once you've established your base stripes, you can add a little more to the left and the right side while the paper's still wet so they'll continue to blend together nicely. And then repeat the same steps for your second ornament. Remember, it's a good idea to let your first ornament dry if you think that you may accidentally touch it, because anywhere that the paint is wet, they will bleed into each other. Once that's dry, we can come in and add the shadows to the red stripes. And to do that, we're going to use alizarin crimson, and we're going to add a little bit of that violet to it, and it's going to make it more of like a wine color. And we're going to add just a touch of that sap green because we don't want it to be as intense. Because it is a shadow, we want it to be a little more dull. Using that new shadow color, I'm going to start dropping that in where the red would be the deepest or the darkest. I'll put down some of the pigment and then I'll use some water and a clean brush to spread it out so that it gradually moves out so I don't have any hard edges. Now you could have stopped, before we started adding these darker shadows, but I think that it adds a lot of interest when you start getting all of these different levels of color into it and does help with the photorealistic look. I'll continue to add this several layers at a time until I'm happy with the intensity and the depth of shadow that I've got. Anywhere that I overdo it, I can just add a little bit of water to that area and then soak up the pigment with a paper towel. You can already start to see that these are really starting to look extremely round now, and the highlights are starting to look really sharp. I'm continuing to leave that highlight on the outer left and right of each ornament. Now I need to repeat the same thing to deepen those shadows for the white areas so that they match those red areas. And you can see here I'm taking that Payne's Gray and I'm running a complete line over all the white and the red areas. This will make those shadows look more blended and cohesive. It won't look like I painted the red with one color and then the white with another color. It kind of just softens it out and blends them together and makes it look like one cast shadow. Here I'm adding just a little bit of that red to the white area. Because that ornament is behind the other one, the red stripes are going to reflect into the white areas of that ornament. So by adding just a hint of it to the white part, again, adds to that realism. And then to soften out any hard edges, just use water on your brush and soften out the edge. And then once you're done with this layer, you'll let that dry and we can come in and do the little tops of the ornaments. And for those, I'm starting with a light wash of quinacridone gold. I'll do the same thing to both ornaments. Just lay down that initial light wash, add some clean water, and then drop in a little bit of that quinacridone gold. And then I'll let that dry. Once that's dry, we can add in some detail. So I'm going to add a little bit of that violet to the quinacridone gold, and you'll see that that immediately starts to muddy it or tone it down, and it looks more like a very aged gold now. And using that, I'm going to draw in a little bit of detail. I'm going to hit what would be the darkest spots. At this point, I can make them any shape that I want. And I decided to make them kind of fluted golden tops. And now I can come in with just a damp brush. So I'm going to clean off my brush, I'm going to dry it off on a paper towel, and then use that to just kind of feather out that shading so that it's not quite as dark, but it's still adding a lot of depth with the shadows and the highlights from that original wash of the quinacridone gold. I went ahead and did the same thing to the second one while I let that dry, and now I need to build up a deeper concentration of that shadow color, so I'm adding more violet to that original quinacridone gold. And then I can come in and reinforce now just the deepest, darkest spots. And just like before, I'll soften out any of those edges so that it's not so harsh. Just continue to add layers until you're satisfied with the depth that you've achieved. And looking at this on video, I can see I should have stopped after the second layer. Now I can go ahead and color the little loop parts that would hold the string. And for that, I'm just going to hit the tops right here with the pure quinacridone gold. And then I'm going to touch each of the bases where they meet the metal cap, I guess, with the darkest color. And just let them blend together. Such a tiny spot that you really don't need to do too much to it. Once your ornaments are dry, you can start adding your background. I'm using the Weathered Wood Tim Holtz Distress Ink marker here. I've scribbled some on a block and I'm using a number 8 round brush to pick it up off of the block and then start painting it around my ornaments. You can use as much water on your brush here as you'd like. If you want a nice soft hazy look, use more water and blend it out till it's clear around the edges. If you want it to look more like it's painted on, use less water and leave your hard lines at the edge. Just continue painting around your ornaments until your background's the way you like it. If you want a darker background, you can go straight to your paper with your watercolor marker and then spread it out with your wet brush. This is going to give you a more intense shadow and further define your edges. And of course, I can't finish a painting without adding a few little splats and splashes and splatters of color, so I'm using that alizarin crimson and a number 4 round brush to just add a few little random splashes of color. Then you can just add your sentiment and you have a one-of-a-kind hand-painted card. Alternately, you could also do this in a much looser style and add your own hand doodling to make it even more personalized. Instead of using the 0 round brush, use a larger one like the number 8 or a number 10. And then just paint it on more quickly and loosely. Here you can see it goes much faster and we're letting the water do most of the work. I'm not being overly precise. And if things get out of the lines, I'm not too worried about it because I'm going to add my own hand doodling anyway, and it'll actually add to the design if it looks a little uneven or imperfect. Just repeat all the same steps as before, except for in this one, don't worry about over blending it. Don't worry if the lines are a little hard. It's actually going to add to the quirkiness of it and make it more fun. You can try adding a variety of mediums over top of your watercolor. You can use your white gel pen to add interest, or you can add glossy accents to this now. You can even add stickles and things like that over it. For this one, I did add some stickles to the highlighted areas, and I think it just adds a lot of fun to the image. So that's just a couple of ways that I've experimented with painting these ornaments. Each one that you do will turn out differently because it's almost impossible to duplicate them. But it's great practice because it's a small canvas and it's not very intimidating. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Sorry it was on the long side. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I just wanted to make sure I included as much instruction as possible because it was a request. Remember, you can find all the featured W+9 supplies at w+9.com. You can also connect with us on our blog at stampawaywithme.blogspot.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. Again, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.